this was our shit. This is my shit. What do you mean? My great grandmama, granddaddy lived here. Like, don't play with me. But it ain't shit peaches and cream. It never is with black people. Some people that would go out to the field to work and then come back and their house is demolished. Had no. Hey, beautiful people. Thanks for tuning into History with Chemistry, the place to learn all black history that has been intentionally left and hidden from you. If you're new here, go ahead and give me a subscribe. Today, we're going to be talking about racism in the North, specifically Canada. If you haven't been tuned into this series, it is called Racism in the North because when you think about historical racism in America, you always think about the South. Baby, it was everywhere. And I'm going to end this series in Canada. Nova Scotia, to be specific. Nova Scotia has a lot of black history, and it often goes unnoticed and untalked about, when in reality, most of its modern day history is black. So let's start from the beginning. During the War of 1812, while the United States was still being colonized and Britain and Dutch and all of them, they were still figuring out what land was going to be theirs. The Dutch owned New York. The British wanted New York. So they decided, okay, we're just going to invade and try and fight them for their shit. And we're going to offer their slaves a little bit of freedom in exchange for them to fight for us and fight with us. Now, the enslaved Africans that lived in New York, they was all for it. And the deal was, if you fight for us and we win, we'll give you independence. But if we lose, we're just going to send you to one of our British colonies, which is Nova Scotia and Halifax in Canada. And you'll have your freedom there. But it ain't shit peaches and cream. It never is with black people. So the Dutch and the British ended up fighting, and the British get their asses whooped. But they were able to keep up their end of the deal, which was send some 3,000, 4,000 African Americans to Canada in Halifax in Nova Scotia. The only issue with this, like even though it seemed really sweet and it was a kind gesture, they were sent there with no resources. So you're taking people that were making no money, had no money, and just said, okay, we'll put you on a train, we'll put you on a plane, we'll put you on a ship, and that's it. So you already know where this is going, but I'm going to tell you. So Nova Scotia and Halifax already had a white population. And like I mentioned a lot in this series of Racism in the North, white people do not like when black people live near them. So what do you think happened when 3,000 to 4,000 black people ended up in a white neighborhood, in a white town? Whatever came to your mind is exactly what happened. These black people were faced with first of all, segregation, because they were literally confined to Halifax and Nova Scotia. If they went anywhere else inland, get your ass back to your room. That's exactly the vibe that they was getting. And within Halifax and Nova Scotia, the white people, they did start to initiate something called white flight, which I mentioned here on this page a lot. It's when white people leave a town or city, neighborhood in mass, and they take with them their taxes, they take with them their businesses, they take with them what made this city a city, right? And now it's just kind of like a ghost town with actual human beings still living there, but they're black. Knowing that black people had no money to establish for themselves. Well, one thing about black people, we gonna make shit work. Because within like 5 years, there was a whole ass city named Africville. And I guess I couldn't say city, it's a town, but it's called Africville. Over time, Nova Scotia and Halifax became part of the Underground Railroad. During this time, you already know, like 1865 is when slavery was abolished. So they had quite a bit of time to accumulate a lot of black people to create Africville. And Halifax, Nova Scotia was the promised land. It was a promised land. Africa was too far away, and not to mention we didn't know how to get to Africa. But we knew what due north was, and we just gonna keep going. And shit, once we see a big, great body of water, we almost there. So that's what the enslaved Africans of, south of Canada did. They ended up trying to flee to go north. So Canada was the end of the Underground Railroad. So if you ever hear that, it was Nova Scotia, specifically Africville, which is why I mention it in this series because it's important. Now, the way that Africville was able to stay self-sufficient was these people had their own skills. So they were fishers, they were farmers. They did know how to operate certain machinery and how to create. We are innovators. Black people are naturally innovators. So we found a way and we made that shit work for somewhat 200-300 years. Shout out to us. And I keep saying Africville, it's Africville, but something in my mind just keeps saying, but understand what I'm saying when I say Africville. Africville. Another way that black people were faced with discrimination was by the government. Now, even though Britain had good intentions sending them to this area, the government neglected them in so many ways. They didn't have proper sewage, proper plumbing. The infrastructure was horrible. There was no money invested into this area that was designated for black people. This went on for the 100-200 years that Africville Yeah, the Africville thrived until something called urban renewal in the 1960s. Now, urban renewal was not only something that happened in Nova Scotia, urban renewal happened all over the United States, and it's the reason that we have a lot of gentrified areas that have Black histories, but there's no sign of it. Now, a part of urban renewal that is kind of promoted, I'm actually going to read it off here just so I can get it right. It says, the goal of urban renewal was to modernize the city, clear slums, and make way for infrastructure projects such as road, bridges, and industrial developments. But, however, Africville was not a slum. This was a thriving community. Africville was exactly what a lot of Tulsa and different Black Wall Street all over Oklahoma, all these different Black cities like Collagen, all these different Black cities. It was not a slum just because it was Black people. There were businesses, there was a school, there was a church. This is a community that people live in. Fuck putting Black, because it's almost like that makes us inferior, that people live in. But to white people, we were not people, and it did not matter. A key part of all of this is, from the beginning of it in like the late 1700s, 1800s to 1960s, that's a lot of generations of people that moved there, moved out, passed away. So there was an issue when it comes to having the titles and deeds to your homes. Now, I've been a part of this situation before, where, a great-great-grandma passed down a home, but she didn't pass down the deed. It was just more or less like, we knew this is great-grandma's home, this big mama's home. So, grandma passed away, grandma passed it down to one of us, and we don't have the deed. So it's time to come prove it to the government who wants to renew this area for urban renewal. You can't prove that it's yours, right? And that was the issue in Nova Scotia and Halifax, was that a lot of people in the 60s, they knew this was our shit. This is my shit. What do you mean? My great grandmama, granddaddy lived here. Like, don't play with me. But they couldn't prove it. And that is how the gentrification and this urban renewal and displacement of the residents started and was actually executed properly. Like the way that they say this happened properly. This is how it's supposed to go. Because you didn't have proof of this was your house. This is the legal route that we take. But they didn't do it with any type of courtesy, any type of consideration of this being someone's home. Ancestral land damn near, right? To the point where there were some people that would go out to the field to work and then come back and their house is demolished. Had no clue. Now, the city government tried to say, oh, we gave them notice. We gave them notice. What the government did was they put posters up and was like, hey, this is all going to be knocked down. Make sure you reach out to us, blah, 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 blah. But there was no direct date. There was no time. There was not even a discussion. There was nary a discussion. So that was their way of saying, oh, we told them about this. So many people. And there was also a church owner. That's so sad. A pastor. He said he went to church on Sunday. That church was not there. The people telling pastor, they took your church down. Your church is gone. Can you imagine that? Can you fucking imagine that? You own this house. You've lived here all your life. Your family, your generations and generations have lived here all y'all lives. You come back from work and that shit is demolished from the government. You can't even call the police. That's some American ass shit. I'm not gonna hold you. And this was a British government. The reason that I mentioned that church is because that church was like the center of the community. It literally sat in the middle of the community. That's where the community would go. If you already know, the Black community was heavily centered around the church. And the church was the way that the thing that gave us hope. We didn't have a lot of faith and a lot of things to look up to outside of the church. So demolishing our church was kind of like demolishing our faith, and they knew what the fuck they were doing. This pushed a lot, if not all, of the Black community of Halifax and Nova Scotia into bordering states and into America. Now, Halifax did acknowledge, I believe they apologized in 2010. Yeah, I believe it was 2010, and they're trying to preserve the history and the stories of the people that once lived there. Fuck all that. Fuck all that. A good thing about all this is the very few people that actually stayed after the demolition of their town, they made sure that their history was taught in schools, and to this day, Africville is taught about in schools, but it's not taught about in America, which sucks. So that's why I bring this to you today. That is all that I want to mention to you. Again, I hope you subscribed. If you're this far and you haven't subscribed, you're weird. I'm just playing, but no, go ahead and subscribe, click the links in the link tree, follow me on TikTok and Blue Sky and Instagram and all that extra stuff. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. I'll see you soon.